Let's get centered. This week, our special guest, Jake Braun, talks to us about his new book, Fentanyl, Fighting the Mass Poisoning of America and the Cartel Behind It. I'm Louis Miranda alongside Jeremy Murphy. We have an exciting episode with a special guest today, Jake Braun, someone who I got to work with at the Department of Homeland Security. He is a professional who has worked at the intersection of politics, national security, and foreign policy for the last 2 decades. He served in both the Obama and Biden administrations, including as the acting principal deputy national cyber director and as a senior counselor to the Secretary of Homeland Security. He also, after actually his first stint in government, or at least his last stint, he had written a book about cybersecurity, Democracy in Danger, how hackers and activists exposed fatal flaws in the election system. And he went on to establish the Cyber Policy Initiative at the University of Chicago. So he's a really, really talented guy. His new book is called Fentanyl, again, Fighting the Mass Poisoning of America and the Cartel Behind It.
How's it going? Thanks for having me.
Thanks for being on, man. It's very exciting. Let me start with what I thought was always the most interesting thing that doesn't get discussed enough. Of course, we have the Trump administration claims that nothing had been done on fentanyl, but this book really lays out an incredible shift in the strategy, which was let's get away from just the kingpin strategy of going after the head of an organization and let's disrupt the operations all across the board.
As we started to look at fentanyl, we initially saw this as, is it a typical narcotics problem, wherever, and we find out, no, actually it's not. This is really more like a mass poisoning because most people, almost no one is looking for fentanyl. And the people who are taking it, it's cut into their drugs. It's cut into their coke or heroin or illicit prescription drugs they don't even know are illicit. And as we delve deeper, we realize that this is really not, one street gang trying to sell, the newest version of crack cocaine or something like that. This is a company or a narco empire the size of a Fortune 50 company. It's been around for over 100 years. We've captured or killed, pretty much everybody they put in charge of this organization in whatever form or fashion it's been over the last 100 years. And it's only gotten stronger. And so after bringing in folks, particularly some of the folks from HSI and CBP who had been working on counterterrorism for the last 20 years, they were like, look, we need to take a counter network approach to this. This needs to be more Al-Qaeda, less Al Capone, right? It's not about taking the one kingpin down and you're going to roll up the whole mob. This has to be, how are we looking at the nodes in the network that if we were to disrupt those nodes, that would have the most degrading effect on the capability of the network to do the bad things that we don't want it to do. And in this case, specifically fentanyl. We weren't trying to end criminality or all the bad things that Sinaloa or other cartels do. We were trying to stop them from selling fentanyl. And because of, I think largely because of us taking this counter network approach, fentanyl deaths dropped 37% a year after we launched the effort. And that's considering overdose fatalities were up to over 100,000 just a year before. You're talking, 37,000 lives that, I think we contributed to still being with us today.
Can you explain for the audience what fentanyl is? We hear it on the news, but what is it exactly, and how does it mix with other drugs?
Oh, that's a great question. So first off, it's a super powerful painkiller. It's like 100 times more potent than heroin even. But I'm glad you made the point about mixed with other drugs, because generally it doesn't mix with other drugs. What particularly in the pharmaceutical sense. So what I think happened, what most people I think happened with Sinaloa is they initially started cutting fentanyl into cocaine and heroin. So in terms of narcotics, there was a mixing of fentanyl with other narcotics because they were able to, since fentanyl is so potent, be able to stretch their cocaine and heroin out further because they put a little bit of fentanyl in it makes it a lot more potent. However, when they were trying to sell fake Oxycontin, fake Xanax, fake Vicodin, fake Viagra, they weren't using the other chemicals that go into any of those drugs. What they were doing was getting their hands on pill presses. And Luis, you'll remember this. We had whole operations just designed at getting the pill presses out of the hands of the cartel, because they would find a pill press that makes the pill look like an Oxycontin or look like a Vicodin. And what they put in it was just binder chemicals to make it stay together, and fentanyl. So there was no Oxycontin in that fake Oxycontin pill. There's no Viagra in the fake Viagra pill. It's just binder chalk type stuff and fentanyl. But because of the pill press, it looks like the real drug, and they're able to sell it to unwitting users.
And you talk in the book about how this was a calculated business decision by the cartel, knowing that they would actually lose more people to overdoses, but that it was worth it from a business decision for them to just get more people who are prescription drug users or recreational drug users hooked on this.
Exactly. So over the last 20, 30 years, we basically legalized marijuana in the country. Even in states where it's not legal, you get it from a state that is not usually a cartel. Cocaine just is not that popular. That was their second biggest commodity, as it was back in its height in the 80s. And so they had to fill the void with something. And one of the things, as you and I both know, Luis, is they took over the migration trade. I mean, you can't cross the border in the U.S. today without somebody paying off a cartel at some point. That started to fill their nut. And then separately, they started cutting fentanyl into everything. But really, they had not done much in the fake prescription drug market before. If they got their hands on pills they could sell illicitly, they did that. But for the most part, the illicit drug market was, or the illicit prescription pill market was an ancillary side business for them. But because they had to make up for cocaine and marijuana, they entered it in full force, because they saw us weaning all these people off Oxycontin at about the same time that fentanyl was taking off. And they kind of stumbled in the fact that, like, gee, we could make these pills that kind of look like prescription drugs, put some fentanyl in it, and who cares if we kill people? The people who are taking these illicit prescription drugs, we're never going to take cocaine or heroin to begin with, so they're not part of our customer base, so to speak. But if we kill 100 fake prescription drug users by getting one new user that's going to stick with us for a while, that's fine, because none of these people were part of our customer base to begin with. It's a really macabre, completely logical, but very macabre way of thinking about their market.
Yeah, I enjoyed the book too, because it delves into a lot of the what you called the Venn diagram of evil. I think you called it somewhere. But I thought it was interesting that a lot of the stuff that was later applied to the counter fentanyl effort started out with you looking at how do we, you and Morgan looking at how do we target and go after the human smugglers and break those networks down. And so, to me, I think one of the things that is terrible about this debate is that illegal immigration and drug trafficking often get conflated. And there is that Venn diagram that the same organizations are pushing both. But can you talk a little bit about how those are separate and distinct things?
Yeah, and I do mention this in the book, that like the worst possible place to hide drugs is on an illegal migrant, because the first thing that the migrant does when they cross the border is they run toward, not away from, a border patrol agent and claim fear or claim asylum, essentially. And what's the second thing that happens after they do that? They're searched for weapons and drugs. So the best way to lose a load of drugs is to hide it on a migrant who's crossing the border. And so we saw almost every once in a while you'd see a migrant get picked up with a small amount of drugs on them. But by and large, they're moving drugs via same organization, Sinaloa Cartel, but they're moving it with drones and tunnels and secret compartments and tractor trailers and submersible aquatic vehicles and all these different things, not migrants. But those two lines of business, migration and fentanyl, are kind of what they've really tried to fill the gap in their business model with, left by marijuana and cocaine. It's almost like if you were to tell McDonald's they can't sell French fries and hamburgers anymore, they'd go out of business. Well, that's what happened with the cartel, with Sinaloa, with marijuana and cocaine. And so they moved into this space.
So I have a 3-pronged question. This is opioid based. 2, go into where it's actually coming from, the origin. And 3, do you think the Oxycontin, the Sackler thing, created the appetite for this?
Oh, yeah, there's a lot there. So, so where it comes from, so essentially the precursor chemicals, the base chemicals they use for all this stuff, starts out in China. Those chemicals then come to Mexico, sometimes through the U.S., by the way. There's a whole host of shipping routes and so on where some of this stuff comes through the U.S. to Mexico. Other times it goes to Mexican ports into Mexico. Then largely the Sinaloa cartel, they're not the only one, but they are responsible for most of it. Then get these precursor chemicals. They go into labs. That lab could be someone's kitchen, by the way, which is one of the things that makes fentanyl so insidious, is you don't need a whole warehouse like you do with methamphetamine. You can do it in a kitchen. Gets fashioned into whatever they want to make it into, something that looks like Oxycontin, potentially. And then that gets shipped to the United States in a whole host of different ways, as I mentioned before. It could be tunnels, compartments, drones, whatever. I think, and again, I don't know if anybody really knows how this happened, except probably a handful of people in the Sinaloa cartel. And even then, it's so huge, they might not even know exactly how it happened. But at some point, this tiny line of business they had in the cartel, that was maybe the size of like their illicit avocado business before, which we've all read about because it spikes during the Super Bowl. Their illicit avocado business, which was fake prescription pills. There was a tiny business for them before. Some industrious thug got the idea of, well, gee, if I can make pills that look like these other pills, there's a market for it. And the reason there was a market for it at the time this was happening, because remember, Trump basically in the first Trump administration, to his credit, gets President Xi to agree that he's going to stop sale of illicit fentanyl to the United States. That's how pretty much all fentanyl got here, was through regular mail from China to us. Well, it turns out, unfortunately for America, that the Sinaloa cartel has a better distribution network in the United States than the U.S. Postal Service, UPS, and FedEx combined, at least when it comes to distributing narcotics. So fentanyl just explodes after that happens, because they then are the main distributor for it in the country, not the Chinese. They then cut it into everything. As they cut it into some of these fake prescription drugs, they all of a sudden realize, I don't think this was planned. So these guys are smart, but broad corporate planning, I don't know if they are doing a lot of. Anyway, they happen upon this massive market that was being created for fake prescription drugs, because our medical industry was weaning everybody off of Oxycontin, Vicodin, and all the prescription opioids from that epidemic that was winding down at right about the time that Trump got this agreement from Xi. And so that then sends the chemicals to Sinaloa. They start cutting it into prescription drugs, probably unwittingly to them, knowing how they probably unwittingly stumbled upon this massive market. And then all of a sudden now you've got hundreds of millions of potential users who otherwise would never consider taking heroin or cocaine or anything else, but are getting fake Oxycontin online or from a friend or whatever.
And as you said, 100,000 deaths in 2021. So that, I think, is also just stunning, just the level of lethality of these overdoses. And of course, some of that drop is also because of just better informed public, the use of Narcan. But it, to the point that you made in the book, it's very obvious that the change in strategy made a huge difference because of just that steep drop, that 37% drop from when it began to a year later. Also, kind of a trip through memory lane. I thought it was fun how you started with all of the other crises we had to deal with at the beginning. From the Afghan withdrawal to the colonial pipeline. A lot of people have forgotten by now that there was a cybersecurity attack that left people without fuel for weeks, and the work that had to go into even just tracking some of that money that was being paid for ransom by um,
Right.
by the company to then try to track this down and stop it. And so just real quick since you brought up the infrastructure problems at the beginning of the book, what are your thoughts about what we're doing there? Because I think one of the concerns I've had is that the Trump administration's focus on sending, Homeland Security investigators and DEA agents and FBI and DEA all over the country to just pick up migrants who are either in an asylum process or who don't have documentation has taken people away from more serious things. Are you concerned both on the broader picture of what that means for other operations like countering fentanyl smugglers, but also the infrastructure side?
Yeah, I think that HSI is a perfect example. You know, the I in HSI stands for investigations, Homeland Security investigations. Um, these guys, and look, let's call a spade a spade. They were mad at us because we had them changing diapers on the border too, right? Like the HSI guys were always mad at us because they felt like they were taking off investigations. But now it's the same thing, but instead of changing diapers, they're rounding up people in LA and Chicago, when really what they should be doing is what they were hired to do, which is transnational criminal investigations. And that should be going after these networks. And by the way, when it comes to migration, these are not mom and pop coyotes anymore. These are massive transnational criminal organizations like the Sinaloa cartel that have largely taken over the migration trade, or things like fentanyl, human trafficking, things like that, that we should have these guys spending their time investigating instead of running around, dealing with protesters in LA or Chicago or whatever. There is a role that these guys are supposed to play, and it's um, to investigate transnational crime. And
Yeah.
but for them doing that, along with their DEA friends and others, we're never going to get after the fentanyl problem.
Where's the good news? Like, is there anything that's positive, or like, are we making a dent in this?
Oh, for sure. I think there's a couple different things. Number one is uh, that fentanyl deaths are going down. They started going down in 2023, right after we launched Blue Lotus. I think to Luis's point, we can't claim full credit. There was a lot of other things that went into that, Narcan public engagement and so on. So fentanyl deaths are going down. Two, if the Trump administration keeps doing what we were doing and more, by the way, it's not like we were doing everything that could be done. If they keep doing what we were doing and more, I think we should see fentanyl deaths continue to decrease. And the one thing that I have that I know we started taking very seriously, I've heard the Trump administration was going to start paying more attention to, although we'll see if they do. Uh, was what was brought up by every single Mexican official we met with, which is they said, "Look, we hear you on fentanyl, but you know what? These cartel guys would be a hell of a lot easier to beat if they were not armed with military grade weapons made in America. And you guys need to get serious about getting these weapons out of these folks' hands because they're all coming from the United States." And I think we started some programs like Desert Lightning and others to do a better job of keeping these guys, keeping military grade weapons out of these guys' hands. Um, and supposedly the Trump administration is going to keep that going and maybe even do more than we did. It'd be great to see that because defanging the Sinaloa cartel would go a hell of a long way for us to being able to stop them from poisoning our country.
Yeah. And President Scheinbaum did, though, reject the idea of U.S. military strikes on the cartels just last week. Do you see Not that you see, but actually, what are the better ways to collaborate? Because I know you went through all of this talking to DoD and all of the other agencies about how we could actually share information and draw up those Venn diagrams and actually work with DoD constructively. If strikes are not the answer because Mexico says no, what does that look like?
So yeah, I think there's a couple things. Number one is, look, as a Democrat and as somebody who's worked like you, Luis, with multiple Democratic presidents, I don't feel like we have to like be nice about this per se. I think that Trump could do what Bush did with Colin Powell after 9/11. Is, he sent Colin Powell to Pakistan and he said, with Colin Powell, to deliver one message: you're with us or against us. And I think Trump could do that with Rubio, send him to Mexico. I think he doesn't need to be nice. He can say, you're with us or against us. But on top of that, we should say that we're going to do some things on our end. Number one, we're going to start getting very serious about stopping the flow of weapons south to the cartels. Look, I'm a Second Amendment guy. I think we have a right to bear arms in America. However, I don't think Mexican citizens in Mexico who are members of the Sinaloa cartel have a right to bear American arms. So we should get serious about that. And two, we should hack these guys into the Stone Age. And I don't think that any administration, first Trump administration, us, or the current Trump administration, to my knowledge, is going as far as they could with cyber against these cartels. And the thing that's a big opportunity for us is the cartels are more active in cyberspace than they used to be, which means there's more surface area for us to attack. So I think with us getting very serious with the Mexican government, but again, specifically about fentanyl, not about ending all criminality, but saying you're with us or against us on fentanyl. That's important. So they know, so the Mexican government can understand what success looks like, right? Two, hacking the hell out of these guys.
So if it's a war on drugs, right? It's a war. And when we got bin Laden, we went into Pakistan, and we didn't tell them we were going in, right? We kind of penetrated their space, and we got rid of him. And arguably, fentanyl is killing more people than Al Qaeda did. Why not blow these cartels up if we know where they are? Why not bomb them?
I mean, honestly, there's a whole host of things we've done over the years where we do actually go in, usually with the Mexican military, and blow things up. It's not usually our military. Oftentimes it's, I mean, there's plenty of movies about this. I don't need to,
Right.
Divulge top secret information, watch Sicario and things like
Right.
that. So we do things like this all the time. That's why I'm a little bit concerned about what the president of Mexico said, because up until now, we've had cooperation where we could go in and blow things up in Mexico. We were just doing it with them. And so if she's changed that, that's actually a degradation of our capability, probably because we were talking about doing this in a ham-handed way.
Well, that's what I think it is. I think it's that ham-handed way of trying to like over the top be like the bully and tell them, we're going to do this, and it puts her in a terrible situation. We talked about this on our last episode where, or a couple episodes ago, where if she allows the United States military to come in, it completely destabilizes her government, and the Mexican military exists basically to keep the U.S. military from invading again. And if she doesn't allow it and we do it, we destabilize her even worse. And so it's an unstable Mexico is bad for the U.S. They're still our largest partner. So that's why I think we can't be as direct as we were with Abbottabad in that scenario going after bin Laden. But to Jake, to your point, like we have transnational criminal investigative units throughout the Americas that we work with. Homeland Security Investigations helps trains them. You talk about this in the book about how we consistently polygraph them to make sure that those tentacles of the cartel that corrupt law enforcement don't get to them, and that we continuously vet against that. So like there are mechanisms to be exploited if you do it right, but you need to do it collaboratively, or you're just going to make it worse. And if Mexico collapses or refuses to work with us, they can make the migration problem way worse in an instant, in a heartbeat. And we saw this. I mean, when they didn't want to help or they ran out of money, we saw the impact instantly.
Oh, right. And I mean, first off, what the Mexicans have shown us repeatedly for decades, and in particular on fentanyl, they're more than happy to go bomb a fentanyl lab for us. Uh, you know, they don't want this in their country either. And the worst thing we could possibly do is go in and invade or something. I mean, then my God, you're forcing the cartel into the government's arms. I mean, like, you know, or vice versa. It's, you know, as a friend of mine in the military I was talking to just the other day about this, they were like, you know what? Once you declare war or start military operations, all bets are off. You have no way of predicting what's going to happen next. And, um, you know, I think that we have a well-trodden way to do this. And, you know, we've had success against these guys in the past, and we can again here if we employ the right tactics.
So
Yeah.
I'm going to ask you a question. You know, going back to Pakistan, one of the reasons we didn't tell them we were getting bin Laden was we didn't trust the ISI. Mexico has a very sordid history of being corrupt, and these cartels bribing the very people who are supposed to be fighting this. How do we trust them?
So, great question. First off, we don't. And by the way, just so we're not like casting aspersions on the character of the average Mexican law enforcement official. Remember I can't pronounce it. I always screw up the pronouncement, but it's plomo o plato, right? So there's like it's silver or lead, but you don't really have a choice. I mean, you have a choice whether you're going to take the job, whether you're going to take the bribe or take a bullet to the head. But unfortunately, for a lot of these law enforcement and other officials, the bullet offer extends to your family as well. So it's not even like you can just be a courageous person and say, you can kill me all you want. I'm still going to they'll kill your kids too. Right. So this is what they're dealing with. But if you look at like what we did, so, for example, in the war on terror, we had Operation Gallant Phoenix, where we had a whole host of partners from the region, from every country in the region. They faced the same corruption and infiltration issues and plomo plato of their own kind that we do with Mexico. But we were able to build things so that there's cordoned off information that only the U.S. folks see. There's things we can do with folks who are going to work directly with us, like the TCIUs that we polygraph and so on. So we don't actually need to trust everything about how the Mexican government would prosecute this campaign. For us to be able to work with them. And there's tried and true ways that we did this during the war on terror, even to account for that.
Yeah. And I love too that you cover the Russian dynamic, because it's a much more complicated picture when you start working in the Russian criminal networks, the Chinese suppliers, which oftentimes, as you noted in the book, most of the companies that provide these chemicals that get made into fentanyl are doing it on a regular market. They're part of the formal economy. It's not even like they're just some criminal network working underground. So it's a much more complicated picture, and one that you've got to add nuance to. And unfortunately, this administration just doesn't do nuance. And my biggest concern is just what it does to the long-term impact of whether it's the collaboration with Mexico, the collaboration with other partners throughout the region, our ability to even have our intelligence partners in places like the UK trust us. I mean, you know, if we lose all of that, then the rebuild after this administration is just that much harder, including on things like this that are so vital to keeping us safe.
Well, and even just limiting fentanyl deaths. You know, if we're going to just go out and try and again do whatever it is we're doing, I think ending criminality in Latin America, it seems to be what the objective is. But even that I haven't heard from anybody actually say. So the governments in the region, whether they be Mexico or anybody else, don't even know like what metrics are they going to be measured by.
Yeah.
By what? By number of fentanyl deaths in the United States, by number of migrants who cross the border, by tons of cocaine they find in the Caribbean, by, you know, wildebeest crossing the Sahara tomorrow. Like, who knows, right? Because no one knows what the objective is. We need a clear objective as to what this campaign is about, with a clear definition of what success looks like, so we can know if we're winning. And by the way, know who's in charge. Can you guys, aside from the president, of course, who below the president is actually in charge of this campaign in Latin America against the cartels?
Couldn't tell
Yeah.
you.
Homan, Hegseth, Rubio, somebody below those people.
I don't
Miller.
think
I
they
mean,
know.
How do you judge those arguments from the Trump administration that just nothing had been done? I take it as an insult, not just to the Biden administration, but also to like the intelligence officers, agents, DEA, ATF, you name it, who've been working on this stuff for years.
Yeah, well, and a lot of the same people who are doing this for Trump were the people who were working on it for us. So, in many ways, it's slapping the people who are working on this for them in the face as well. And yeah, I mean, I think that first off, the numbers speak for themselves. Deaths decreased by 37%. You're talking, again, almost a 40% drop in just a year. And many of these tactics are the exact tactics that they're expanding upon now. I
Yeah.
think, frankly, that we'd be better off if they weren't trying to. I guess I don't know exactly what they're trying to do by naming all these cartels terrorist organizations, because we're not going to. No president, no country could end criminality, but we could end fentanyl, and it'd be great to see these policies narrowly targeted at fentanyl like we did.
Yeah.
And when we launched Blue Lotus, which I know you were around for that, we surged hundreds of guys to the borders, to the border. We had the intel agencies all up looking at all this stuff. Treasury launched sanctions against the Chinese chemical companies. DEA took out a bunch of their top level bosses. We rounded up literally thousands of henchmen and thousands of pounds of fentanyl and other stuff. Tractor trailers, drones, everything else. That's the kind of like targeted operation where you're hitting a network from multiple levels, attacking their money, attacking their foot soldiers, attacking their managers, attacking their logistics operations. That's what we did against Al Qaeda. That's what we did against ISIS. That will work if it's narrowly focused on fentanyl and Sinaloa. It's not going to work if it's trying to end some amorphous thing like criminality all across Latin America, across thousands of cartels.
Yeah.
Look, if at the end of the day, the whole reason we named these cartels as terrorist organizations is so that we could bring in the military. Like, I'm not actually totally against that. I think using the military on fentanyl is justified. But if that's what we're doing, then the target we're aiming at in Venezuela is about 2,500 miles away from the center of gravity for fentanyl, which is Sonora.
It's in the wrong place. Yeah. And I think that last part is so fascinating to me because the reality, and you lay this out pretty well in the book, how the challenge that it took for you all with Deputy Secretary Tien to go to all of the agencies in the intel community and DOD and try to get them to be part of this effort to really turn on more of the intelligence and military apparatus on countering the overall smuggling networks. I think that's an example of how you can do it responsibly. But to your point, it feels like what the Trump administration is doing is taking efforts that were set up to be able to do something responsibly and through law enforcement. At the end of the day, the effort was you're going to leverage these resources to get these people arrested, to get them tried, to get them off the streets, to confiscate the drugs, free the people who are being trafficked. And instead, they're doing it to just randomly blow up boats for show and for seemingly other purposes. So what do you think it's going to take for in this context now where the Trump administration is taking those smart approaches and turning them into over the top PR stunts that I think in many ways work against what their stated goal is? What's it going to take to sort of shed light on that? Jeremy always likes to say, like, at least it shows they're doing something.
Right. Well, I mean, I think that a couple things need to happen. I think Congress in particular, but also the American people need to really ask the administration to define what the objective is here. Because if the objective is to combat fentanyl, well then, like I said, we're 2,500 miles off target. For example, during the war on terror, nobody asked George Bush why we were blowing up this boat or that boat, because they understood, well, they're doing that because we're trying to stop terrorism. Well, right now, I don't think the American people or Congress really have any idea why we blew up that boat or the other boat or the next boat. Is it about fentanyl? Is it about criminality in Latin America in general? Is it about migration? Like, we don't understand the objectives of this campaign. And also, if we don't understand the objective, how can we know whether we're winning or not? At what point does this end? You know, because again, no president, no country can end criminality. And we just don't have defined terms of what the objectives of this operation are.
No, I really liked that you did this. I mean, I think it's a story that needs to be told. I thought I was struck by what you wrote also in the opening notes about how a lot of this stuff hasn't been reported, and so you can't necessarily cite a lot of things that maybe showed coverage of it because it didn't exist. Um, that I think is such speaks to why this was so important because you're actually putting out a record here of what actually happened. So, talk to us also about just that process of taking pen to paper, and you did it all obviously already with your prior book on cybersecurity or on the elections. But talk to us about that process.
Yeah, it's it's a challenge. Part of it is just being disciplined, and I have a terrible memory, so just writing down, what we were experiencing at the time, and I thinking through that, like Morgan and I, the woman you mentioned before, who was my partner in crime and all this, we go down to Mexico City, and I think you've probably been to the Sofitel there, which is like basically where all the U.S. government officials stay and hang out because it's a hotel attached to the embassy, and we have these meetings. We meet with our TCIUs, which are these elite Mexican law enforcement agents who are on the U.S. payroll and HSI's payroll, and they kick down doors for us in Mexico because we can't, because we're not law enforcement there, but they are.
Yeah.
And they're polygraphed all the time, to weed out corruption and so on. Anyway, so we're talking to these guys, and they're telling us all the stuff they're doing. They're giving us a briefing. So after work, we go up to the top of the Sofitel, and we're sitting there having some beers. I'm like, oh, I'll buy you guys drinks. Thanks for everything you're doing for us. So we're having some beers. And then, of course, that turns into tequila. And then these guys bring out their phones, and I know there is kind of like a good amount of that in the book. But I mean, that's the culture we're in. It's like law enforcement and so on. But anyway, they bring out their phones, and they're showing us, them taking down these guys that they just, cartel guys they just brought down. They're all handcuffed up, that they're loading into helicopters, and they show us the safe house that all these weapons and everything else. And you're sitting there, and the whole time I'm listening to this going, I've got to write this down when this is over, because these guys are they're like the real James Bond. I mean, like literally, like these guys are the stuff they're doing. It's like they're out of Sicario or something like that,
Yeah.
And it's trying to keep an eye to that and like write it down,
This is phenomenal information. I hope more people pay attention to it. We're glad we can help get the word out a little bit about it. And also the great work that other people did, because just to clarify and make just such an important point, and you made this in the book, we were changing strategy. I think you and Morgan were the tip of the spear of like a really innovative way to switch things, and working with Deputy Secretary Tien and others. But we did it by leveraging the folks that are there day in and day out, the same folks who weren't getting paid during the shutdown, the same folks that are going to be there administration after administration, working with those TCIUs to kick down those doors and break up those stash houses on the other side of the border. All of that really depends on government functioning, and hopefully people learn from this that regardless of administration, when it comes to our security and keeping the American people safe, party should be the last thing anyone should be thinking about. And how do we protect these systems so that they don't degrade and make it harder to keep us safe? So really appreciate you for writing the book for that reason alone, if not everything else that's in there.
Well, thanks so much, and it was great to be in the trenches with you as all this was unfolding.
Yeah, that was a lot of fun. I always thought that the Blue Lotus name was inspired by the HBO show myself. I don't think we could.
White Lotus. Well, no,
White
do you
Lotus.
remember? Remember, because we were doing the next iteration of it, and I was like, oh, we should call it White Lotus probably because I had heard about the TV show but hadn't watched it yet.
Right.
Somebody was like, no, we can't do that, and I'm like, why not? I'm like, anyway, there's a whole reason why I wanted to call it White Lotus. And they're like, well, because there's a TV show called that. And I was like, oh, right, that's where I got that name from the TV
We would have
show.
had to bring in Jennifer Coolidge. Well, Jake, really appreciate you. Thanks for your
Thank
time.
you so much.
Thank you.
All right, take care. But we also have some other news, headlines of the day, including the cases against Jim Comey and Letitia James have been dismissed by the court.
By the way, no surprise. The judge had ample reasons to do it. One of the most, incendiary ones was, it was a malicious prosecution, which we all know by Trump's tweets. The problem with that is it's subjective, right? The second one was the grand jury thing, where the whole grand jury didn't get to see the final indictment. The one thing that is black letter law was that Lindsay Halligan, her appointment was invalid. Presidents have a certain day period to appoint an acting U.S. attorney, and Jake Siebert had that role, and then he got dismissed because he didn't think there was any merit to this. And then Halligan came in, but her appointment had to be confirmed by the Senate, and it wasn't. And that's black letter law. Like that's statute, and versus something subjective or a procedural error. I think the judge was looking for the one thing that would stand up on appeal.
It was just a ridiculous case to begin with, especially when it began with President Trump tweeting or truthing that he was basically ordering Pam Bondi to do this and why she hadn't done it yet. CNN, federal judge dismisses indictments against Letitia James and James Comey, saying Lindsay Halligan appointment was unlawful. And yeah, again, a black eye for the administration. They're constantly trying to get around doing the right thing and trying to manipulate the rules, step over norms. It's a waste of money. It's a waste of resources. And in many cases, it's also a distraction. I mean, to no small degree, these actions help the administration be able to, try to sidestep or get around other things like the Epstein files or why they're actually trying to go to war in Venezuela and things of that nature.
Well, the judge left open the possibility for them to refile. I thought that was kind of cowardly. I mean, this is a vendetta. Trump is not going to let this go. With Comey, it's a statute of limitations because they filed, they went to the grand jury like 3 days before the end of the statute of limitations.
Jeremy, the other big headline this week, of course, Marjorie Taylor Greene resigning because she couldn't take the pressure from Donald Trump after he called her Marjorie Traitor Greene.
It's ironic that she left kind of with a conscience, because some of the stuff she was standing up for, it's like, I agree with it. And I've never agreed with anything this woman has ever said. I always thought she was dumb as hair.
Well, yeah, I mean, she talked about Jewish space lasers. She is big on every conspiracy theory out there.
Yeah.
And, the other thing is, though, that, and there's analysis that I saw that suggested that she could have still won the primary, but that what she didn't want was to have to spend the next 3 years defending Donald Trump. Think about that. Your most rabid warrior out there is like, oh my God, I have to defend this guy for 3 years after what he's just done to me. And boy, you got to wonder the kind of threats and harassment her family was suffering at the hands of MAGA world. So that speaks volumes too. But
well, a broken clock is right twice a day, right?
Yeah, there you go.
And with her, it was like, I think she seized on a couple things. Trump, his foreign policy, he's very much involved in the Middle East and South America now, and it's like America first. Like, why aren't you concentrating on this? Affordability, that's a thing, and the Epstein files. Like, she kind of weirdly got a brain transplant, and like hit these issues that most Americans are worried about. Not most, the foreign policy thing. I think that's a MAGA thing, but affordability, I
Yeah.
think, is something that most people are. And the Epstein files, I think that's kind of there is interest in that. It's not a kitchen table thing though. It's a gossip thing,
Well, but
but
it's more
it's
than
not
gossip. I think
affecting
it's
anybody's life.
principled for MAGA though, because
Yeah,
they built this whole world around that conspiracy, and
yeah.
now they have to answer for it. But to see her on her way out as Mamdani is standing next to this guy in the Oval Office was just stunning.
Well, the other thing is like Trump has no ideology. He is whatever's most convenient. He's not a Republican. He's never been a Republican. Look at his past. He always supported gay rights. Like, early he was a Democrat. Trump is whatever's most convenient to him, whatever's transactional. And so, with Mandami, um, you Trump, you go into his office and you flatter him, and then he's your best friend.
That's what I think happened. He went in there and he flattered the hell out of him, or
Yeah.
all the foreign dignitaries who come and give him some gold plate to put on his desk, and now he kills the terrorists and does everything else.
Yeah.
So
I mean,
it's
his opinion is kind of like the last person he talked to.
yeah,
But that's the thing. You go in and you flatter him, and you puff him up. With Mendami, like, he's getting flack for meeting Trump, but you have to take
yeah,
Trump out of it. It's
exactly.
still the White House. It's still the federal government. You have to have a relationship.
Yeah,
So he absolutely did the right thing. He charmed the president, which is good for New Yorkers because the president can turn off the spigots and deprive the state and New York City of a lot of money.
yeah. So that takes us to our final headline of the day. MS Now.
So MSNBC and CNBC and Sci-Fi and USA, they used to be part of Comcast, right? And for years, cable was the cash cow, because you had cable carriage fees and you had advertising. Well, with cord cutting, it's no longer that. And so Comcast wanted to get it off its balance sheet. So they spun it off into a new company called Versant, which includes MSNBC and CN and all these cable channels. The problem is now MSNBC is disconnected from NBC News, right? So now it's its own entity. And part of it is they had to rebrand themselves. They couldn't use the NBC name. So they came up with MS Now, which, is different. I mean, look, they had to do it legally. They had to change their name. And they probably wanted to keep the initials, at least MSN. Um, but, MSN Now has gotten, like, some snickering. Um, But the thing is, that's the only thing that's changing. The hosts are the same, the news is the same, everything, the dial position, whether whatever your cable lineup is the same. Nothing's changed but the name. So I don't understand where that $20 million went. I could have done this for $1 million. Um,
You heard it
so
here, folks. Call Jeremy if you need to rebrand for a 20th of the price.
well,
But yeah,
yeah.
but this article in the New York Times by Michael Grimbaum, what's the cost of changing 2 letters and adding a space? He writes about $20 million, according to 2 people with knowledge of the expected expenditure on a marketing effort that will be splashed across billboards from Times Square to Los Angeles International Airport. Renaming a television network, particularly one with a fervent fan base like MSNBC, is a feat typically attempted only under duress. And yeah, I think you're absolutely right that they're probably overthinking this because the fan base is there. People who love those shows. They're going to stick with them. They've been telling them on air that they're
Yeah.
changing names, so it's not catching anyone by surprise. Like if you're a loyal viewer, you're going to find them.
But
That's
you're
I
going to go. It's not changing channels,
Yeah,
right?
they're in the same
And
place.
so no one's going to say, I'm not watching that because now it's NBC. It's ridiculous. And by the way, if you're not watching MSNBC or MSN Now, a billboard is not going to change your mind.
Yeah, I
Um,
think it's also kind of a funny misunderstanding of the marketplace, because it's less about the cable channel and more about the programming.
Mhm.
When you look at how people consume, so in my case, for example, I use Hulu for my cable. I don't actually have cable. I have Hulu
Right.
with the cable, what is essentially a cable package through Hulu, the live TV option. And but the way that they market things on there, and it's the same thing if you use any of the other streaming services, whether it's YouTube TV or Sling or anything else. The way that they market the shows is really about the show. It's less about the channel. And so if you're a Morning Joe fan, or if you're watching Rachel Maddow or any of the other shows that are on MSN now, you're gonna see that you're not even really focused on the brand of the channel as much as you are in the personalities and the shows themselves. And I think the mindset has to shift. Like, this money would have been better spent focusing on that kind of direct show by show
Mhm.
pitch to people who are consuming snippets or episodes or segments on digital media. I think that would have been a better use of their money.
Well, people are agnostic in terms of network brands, and I think you nailed it. They're not saying, "Oh, I only watch this cable network." No, they go show by show. I mean, what a waste.
And Jeremy, to your point, I think this is the really interesting part in this article um, by Michael Grimbaum. He says the first order of business is to make sure those viewers median age 72. So again, that 72-year-old is still going to find the programming because they're
Yep.
probably still using cable and they know exactly what
Yep.
channel they're putting on. But it's the younger audience where they should be focusing on, okay, let's capture that market share in the digital space,
Yep.
that are watching either snippets or segments on whatever their preferred uh, social digital channel is.
But that's not going to change either. If you watch it on YouTube, it's going to be the same. If you watch it on Instagram or whatever, it's going to be the same. You're not going to have to like completely redo your settings and whatnot. So again, a network is not, it's no longer defined by the symbol. I mean, in the 80s and 90s, NBC was the peacock, right? And CBS was the eye. No one knows what the logo is. They know the faces.
Well, look,
And
and even when I was growing up, I mean, if I was watching NBC, it was because of Cheers or Friends or
yeah,
something like that. I wasn't watching NBC because it was NBC. You know, to me, it was about the shows. This is really funny, is that Grimbaum calls it a newfangled acronym. And apparently now it means my source for news, opinion, and the world.
yeah. And what's interesting is MSNBC now and MS Now and CNBC were part of the spinoff. CNBC you got to keep the NBC, but MSNBC didn't. And that's interesting to me. And I think it's because CNBC covers the financial markets and Comcast is a publicly traded company. And so I think they like the implied connection. Um,
I think that's right.
but there's,
But it's not just the implied connection, but MSNBC has created a lot of challenges through the years for NBC from the news division because it's opinion. And so, there's definitely a history there of the news division kind of having to grapple with some of the things that were said on the opinion shows, and they don't want to be associated with that anymore.
well, and I think you're very smart in saying this because MSNBC is so liberal and they've gone after Trump and it was part of Comcast. And Comcast now it looks to they want to buy Warner Discovery.
Yeah.
And any acquisition is going to require government approval. And it's no secret Trump loathes Comcast and MSNBC because they're constantly after him. And, Trump is not shy of putting his fingers on the scale. And so I think that he is absolutely going to affect their ability to buy Warner Discovery because of MSNBC and them going after him.
Good luck to the folks at MSN Now. A lot of
Yep.
good people over there. I think they're also
Absolutely.
going to struggle not just because of the name change, which I think is the least of it. I think they're going to struggle more because now they've also lost the investigative and reporting depth of NBC News.
Yeah, absolutely.
So they took some good people with them, but a lot of good people who stayed behind were also vital to producing what MSNBC was all about. So wishing them the best. I know that that'll be a challenge to keep producing at the level that they have been with basically a split staff.
Absolutely. And by the way, Steve Kornacki, though, he stayed with NBC. The election guy with the maps.
Mm-hmm.
He
He's
stayed
not
with
on
NBC.
MSNBC anymore.
So that's a huge loss for them.
That is a huge loss, and people love Steve Kornacki and his fascinating analysis every time an election rolls around. Well, Jeremy, it was a great episode. Thank you, and
Absolutely.
thank you to Jake again for joining us. Really terrific interview.
Absolutely.
So we'll see you all. We'll take a break for the holidays and be back afterwards. So happy
Very good.
Thanksgiving to everyone. Grateful to have you as our listeners, and grateful to get to do this with you, Jeremy.
Awesome.
Our panel featured Luis Miranda, former Obama White House communications advisor and former spokesperson at DHS, and Jeremy Murphy, former CBS executive, author, and publicist.